This is Big Podcast.
It's Build a Big Podcast, the marketing podcast for podcasters. David Hooper with you, coming to you from Big Podcast World Headquarters in Nashville, Tennessee. Can't you hear the accent? People around here don't think I have an accent. But as soon as I step outside Nashville, yeah, it comes out. BigPodcast.com is the website. It is there that I can help you grow your audience, get more people to your podcast, make a podcast that people care about, and also make money with your podcast. I've got a newsletter. It comes out every week, every Friday to be exact. If you go to bigpodcast.com, you can sign up for it and get it free. This episode is an audio version of that newsletter with additional commentary. I'm going to lead with this. And if you've been following podcasting, you know what it is. It's Spotify's podcast problem, but also opportunity. Do you remember middle school science class? Every action has a reaction. Newton's third law, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Your podcast is one of those things. Words have power. I want you to internalize that for a second. When you say something, it's going to connect with some people, and the reaction is going to be positive, what we call positive. Oh man, I really like that guy. Yeah, I agree with him. I'm on his side. Or you're going to get pushback from people. When they hear your words, they're going to think, no, I don't agree with that guy. And if you've listened to this podcast, there's probably some things that I talk about and you're thinking like, yeah, I don't agree with that guy at all. Last episode, the Satanic Temple, that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, but I also got a message, oh man, I listened to that as soon as I saw it. I also talked about the Baptists though, kind of balances it out. Anyway, go back to the last episode in the feed if you want to hear that. And if you go to bigpodcast.com/subscribe and subscribe to this podcast right now, I've actually got a follow-up to that episode talking about both the Satanic Temple and the Baptist. Anyway, the point is this. Some people loved it, got pushback from some people, and I'm fine with that. I'm not here to please everybody. You cannot please everybody. What pleasing everybody looks like is that you have people who tolerate you. That works for broadcast media. You got 3 TV stations, 5 radio stations. You like rock and roll, there's 1 or 2 options for you. I don't really like the DJs. I don't know who they are. They're nameless, faceless voices that I hear, but I like the music, okay? That works when you're the only game in town. It does not work for the new media landscape that we are in. You've got to plant your flag, and you've got to attract the people who really like you or repel the people who do not. Now, I'm not saying that you should be a jerk or be hateful. If you're doing those things, do better. We've got enough of that in the world. But if you're simply getting pushback, embrace it. That just means that your message is connecting with people. Again, it's going to connect with them in a positive way, or it's going to connect with them in a way that maybe rubs them the wrong way, but they at least care. You don't need everybody to like what you do. And if the message that you have is not for someone, why have them listen to you? That's what Rush Limbaugh had. He had a lot of people that loved him, but he had a lot of hate listeners. Oh, my God, it just made them feel something when they listened to it. Blood would boil and steam would come out of their ears every time they heard him talk. Can you work with that? If so, maybe you can do as well as Rush Limbaugh. Highest paid broadcaster of all time. In this issue of Big Podcast Insider, I've got some great ways for you to get your podcast in front of more people as well as monetize it. Keep moving forward. Again, plant your flag, be who you are, and let people feel you. First up, I want you to steal these marketing ideas to grow your podcast. This is going to do 2 things for you. One, it's going to give you ideas on how to get more listeners for your podcast. The second thing it's going to do is it's going to give you ideas on how to sell ads for your podcast. Can you combine the 2? If you can do that, you have a lot of listeners and you can go sell ads, you're going to make even more money. Here's some of my favorites. Episode quality, not quantity. People are overwhelmed with noise. Ditch paywalls and exclusive barriers. If you want your message to reach as many people as possible, paywalls and barriers are standing in the way of that. As I mentioned in the first part of this episode, when you reach a lot of people, some people are going to like what you do and some people are not. But I want you to reach more of the people who like what you do. And not all of them are going to pay for your content right away. Not all of them are going to download apps where they have to listen to your podcast through that app. Even the number 1 guy on Spotify, Joe Rogan, he has lost a good chunk of his audience because people used to watch him on YouTube. and they're not moving over to Spotify. They didn't care about him enough. And this is with all the media that he's getting right now, all the publicity for whatever he's talking about that people don't like. He's still not at the level that he was before he went exclusive to Spotify. So ditch paywalls and other exclusive barriers. Sponsor other newsletters or podcasts or both. Either will work for you. If you see somebody with a newsletter or a podcast and you think the people reading that newsletter or listening to that podcast are probably the same people who listen to my podcast, well, do it. Get involved with that. Sponsor them. Do a swap. There's a million ways to do this. Giveaways and sweepstakes. I've got a link to a tool to do this. That's a great one. Also, if you want to take that newsletter or that podcast ad to the next level, you can actually acquire an existing newsletter or podcast. Cheaper than you think. It is a possibility for you. And the last one, this is a gold mine. Podcast pod fade all the time. Plenty of people have lists and newsletters, and they get sick of doing them. But they don't want to leave their people hanging, so they're continuing to do them. It's kind of getting old. Don't feel like doing it. You can take over those for people. I've got more information on all of these ideas, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Next up, setting up the right welcome email. This is what I was talking about on the last episode with the Satanic Temple. Sign up for the Satanic Temple newsletter. They sent me a great welcome email. If you're curious about that, go back in the feed or go to bigpodcast.com/subscribe. Subscribe to the podcast. You'll see it there. The title, What Would the Satanic Temple Do? If you're looking to engage more people with your podcast, you need a couple of things. One, you need a newsletter. And I say that because that is the way that you can approach people directly. With a podcast, even if somebody subscribed to your podcast, they may or may not get your episode when you want them to. They may not download every episode. They may not listen to the episodes that they download. But if you've got an email address and you've got a newsletter or something else that you can send out via email, you can go to those people, land in an email box whenever you want. So it's a very important part of your marketing. Is it old school? Yeah, it's old school. Does it work? Yeah, it does. And it's the number one way you can grow your podcast. You need a second thing. And this is why I mentioned the Satanic Temple and also the Baptist Church. You need a very clear belief system that lets listeners know what you stand for. If you go to a church website, baptistchurch.com or wherever, you're going to see something that says Statement of Beliefs or What We Believe. You click on that, it's going to tell you exactly what they believe. If you want to be a member of that church, you believe this stuff too. You join the Satanic Temple newsletter, they're going to send you an email and they're going to say, this is what we believe. You want something very similar to that. If you're not on my mailing list, not the newsletter mailing list, but the other mailing list, I will send you the beliefs of podcasting that I have. I call it the Church of Big Podcast. If you go to bigpodcast.com, you can search for that. I will send it to you instantly. It is part of my podcast growth toolkit. That is free. Bigpodcast.com. Download the podcast growth toolkit. By the way, if you want a good, cheap way to send emails, I've got a way to do that. $49 for life. Pay once, you're good to go. That is linked at newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Speaking of money, I see people all the time. Oh man, podcast hosting. And I'm talking media hosting. Podcast hosting is too expensive. I'm paying a ton of money to host my podcast and get it out to people. Well, I got an option for you. It's called Castopod. It's a free and open source podcast host. If you're sick of paying a third party to host your podcast, Castopod may be for you. There is some money involved. You got to go to Amazon or Google or wherever you store something. You got to get the data to people. But it's a lot cheaper to do that directly than to go to a third party who is also going to Amazon or Google or wherever they're storing their podcast. Most podcast hosts, feel free to fact check me on this, but the last time I checked, Libsyn was the only one that owned their own servers. The other major podcast hosts, they're using Amazon, which is great because Amazon's got all this computing power. And if you need more, just tell them to add more. You need less, tell them to add less. So the whole thing can contract and expand more or less on demand. It's a good way to do it. You can do that yourself though, and you can do it with Castopod. It's an open source software. The concept is something very similar to the software that I'm using to record this podcast right now. Audacity. If you've used Audacity, you understand open source software. Sometimes it's a little bit quirky. Sometimes it doesn't work as well as a commercial product. They're not making money at it, at least not directly, not like Adobe or Pro Tools or Isotope. Development can be slow. There's volunteers that are making it, but you've got a bunch of people who are very passionate about it, and they can work with you to get it set up and get you where you need to be. Anyway, it's worth looking at. Definitely check it out, if for no other reason, to know if it's a good option for you or maybe your podcast buddies. Hey man, you're on a budget? You might want to check out Castopod. It's linked, newsletter.bigpodcast.com. If you've listened to me for a while, you know I've got a background in the music business. I was a music marketing guy for a long, long time. I still do broadcast radio related to the music industry, so I'm not totally out of it. Plus, I'm in Nashville, like I mentioned. Can't get too far away from the music industry while you're here. With that said, I say that to say that I used to think that I was a business person, and I was when you compared me to the musicians that I was working with. Then I got involved with a product with a bunch of startup and tech bros. Those dudes had a fetish for spreadsheets. They would get so excited. Oh man, have you seen the new Excel spreadsheet? Oh my God. They would completely flip out about numbers or data crunching or whatever the hell it was. I don't know. I couldn't read it. That's when I knew that I was actually a creative person. However, I am definitely more business than the majority of podcasters. Many podcasters I know, are you one of these guys? They'll delay an episode release or cancel a guest for something like the wind blowing a little too hard. I just don't feel like it today. Really similar to the musicians that I've worked with. If you want a big podcast, you've got to take care of your business. It's not just doing a podcast whenever you feel like showing up. This newsletter that this is the audio version of, newsletter.bigpodcast.com, it goes out every Friday. In the last year, I've missed 2 Fridays. One of them was Christmas. One of them is New Year's Day. It's a holiday. Nobody's reading it anyway. I'm on holiday. But those other 50 weeks out of the last year, you got this newsletter delivered to your box, 10 a.m. Eastern. As a podcaster, you have to have that consistency with your podcast. And I'm not saying that it has to be every week, every Friday, 10 a.m. Eastern. Sometimes the best thing to do as a podcast is to pay off like a slot machine. It's random. Some days you get it Tuesday. Some days you get it Wednesday, Thursday, Sunday. Some days you get 2 episodes. Some days you don't get any. That is fine. But you've got to take care of your business, whatever that looks like. I've got a detailed look about how planning, preparation, and communication will improve meeting success, collaboration with others, and everything talked about in this article, it applies to your podcast. Great episodes start before you even book a guest. Great podcasts focus on what's not working, and you make those things work. Great podcasts are not a host show. It's not just about you. I mean, you're involved, but the main focus should be your audience. And if you're interviewing guests, the main focus, your guest. Great podcasts have a clear, repeatable structure. It's not only in how you lay the podcast episode out, but how you make the episodes that you release. Great podcasts continue after the episode has been published. When you hit the publish button, you could argue that the work is really just beginning. Technically, that episode is available to people, but if they don't know about it, they're not going to be able to get it. That's where the marketing comes in. That's happening before, during, and after. All of this is linked. It's at newsletter.bigpodcast.com if you want more information about this. Read it and get your podcast business together. How do you turn listeners into paying customers? A defined conversion strategy will help turn more of your listeners into paying customers. If you are not actually thinking about this, now is a good time to start. We just started the year up. We're in the 2nd month of this year. You've got 11 more months where you could work on this, and a year from now, you could be feeling great about the money your podcast is making. Here's why people will pay you. 5 ways. People will pay you for distinct and differentiated content, something they cannot get anywhere else. Number 2, people will pay for content that saves them time. If I can show you how to cut your episode editing in half, that's going to be worth paying for. If I can show you how to make more money with your podcast, that's going to be worth paying for. Anytime you can invest $1 and bring back $2 through time savings or income, people are going to do that. 3, people will pay to support meaningful movements. The Satanic Temple, it's got a donation button. The Baptist Church, they got a collection plate. If people feel connected to something, they'll give you money. They don't ask for anything in return. They appreciate the goodwill that you're doing. The fourth thing, people will pay to support individuals they value. I got a message yesterday from Bandrew. You know him because you've seen his microphone reviews on YouTube. A couple of episodes ago, I talked about a video he did that explains to people how they are using their microphones wrong. BandrewSays.com is the website. As I mentioned, the guy's got hundreds and hundreds of microphone review videos. Is that worth paying for? Yeah. Do you appreciate the work that this guy's putting into things? Yeah. So there's an opportunity for him to make money off of that. If you are a person that people like and you are spreading a message that people agree with, they will pay you money. The fifth thing, people will pay for content that gets them results. That goes back to what I said before. If I can invest $1 and get $2 back, I'm going to do that all day. If I can invest time and you can save me even more time, that's a good investment for me. So consider these things and make them happen. We're in the second month of the year. Don't stop now. This could be your best year ever. Newsletter.bigpodcast.com. Thank you for listening to Build a Big Podcast. Bigpodcast.com is the website. If you go to bigpodcast.com/subscribe, you will see a subscribe button. Hit it. I've got one for iPhone, one for Android. I've got an RSS feed linked if you want to subscribe that way. Bigpodcast.com/subscribe. It's easy to remember. What do you want to do? Subscribe. What do you want? A big podcast? Put it together. Bigpodcast.com/subscribe. Thanks so much for listening. Thanks for subscribing to the newsletter and supporting Big Podcast. I've got good things coming up this year, and I'm excited to share them with you. More new episodes coming up soon, including revisiting the Satanic Temple and the Baptist Church. That's coming up next on Build a Big Podcast. Go to bigpodcast.com/subscribe, and I'll see you then.